We specifically have democracies to prevent a might is right attitude. And I think that the irony of saying we must have armed resistance to the state is that the reality of that statement, that you and I as neighbours may not agree in the way that that state should be run, and so we have a vote. We don't shoot at each other. I think basically the idea behind the Second Amendment is an entirely honourable and good one. The state should be afraid of its population. The state should act on the people's behalf, by the people, for the people, not to the people. That is absolutely fundamental to my belief set. But at the same time, the idea of opening fire on the state at any point where it isn't resistance to a foreign invader is ridiculous. It's an anathema. Because essentially what you're saying is that I have the right, because I'm armed, to subvert the state. And that is my problem with your position. I understand, however, exactly where you're coming from, both from a cultural perspective and also from an intellectual perspective, which says that at some stage it may be useful to be armed. And frankly, that's part of the reason that I have a shotgun licence. I cannot envision a situation in which I would ever bring that out and start shooting back. But I do get the mindset which says I must own a gun in order to defend myself. I just don't accept that that's ever going to happen. I mean, we cannot have a bunch of individual Judge Dreds walking around the place and going, I am the law, pull out the gun and dictate the law that way. That's precisely what a democracy is about stopping. And that is my definition of freedom. And I think when you start saying we must have guns in order to defend ourselves, you are walking an awfully tight line. Because I also believe, and this is really the second argument that I was trying to put forward last time, and again I articulated very badly, most people don't own guns because they believe that the Second Amendment, protection against tyranny, is going to happen to them. They own the gun perhaps because that's a possibility, but also because they fear that their neighbours got a gun. And I say neighbour, I don't necessarily literally mean neighbour. By the way, I've had some of the most ridiculously literal translations of the comments I've been making. So if you're out there and you're thinking, Billy, you've made a stupid comment, just run it by your brain and see if that makes sense. Sorry, not you, Fake Sagan, but commenters generally. Because some of them have been ridiculous. Anyway, I don't literally mean your neighbour, I mean a criminal element, or somebody that's got a bit pissed up and has decided to go and have a quick shoot. I mean, there is no doubt that the murder rate in the States, murder rate by guns in the States, is higher per capita than almost anywhere else on Earth. And I don't, by the way, I don't at all disagree with your points about the cops being armed. I believe that the cops shouldn't be armed. I can understand why one would want to arm oneself in an environment where they are. SO19, which is the Metropolitan Police's armed unit, has got one of the worst rates in the world at shooting people that shouldn't have been shot. My particular favourite is they shot a guy with a Scottish accent who had a table leg and a carrier bag when he walked out of a pub because they thought he sounded a bit Irish and that might have been a gun. Don't arm the police would be my argument. They have the right to be armed in the States because the Second Amendment says citizens can be armed, which means they have to assume all citizens are armed. That's their argument. We'll argue about that another time. My point is that if you have a criminal element in society and you think, actually, I must protect myself, that's probably the reason that most people get a gun. They probably think, I want to protect my property, my family, that's why I must have a gun. And I can have a gun because of the Second Amendment. They're different arguments, they're different reasons for having guns. I think that actually that's an equally stupid reason to having a gun, because the reality is, if you look at the US national disaster statistics, you've got a less than 4% chance of having any kind of violent crime, armed or otherwise, committed against you in any given year across the states. Clearly there are hotspots, clearly there are exceptions, but that as a broad statistic holds true, and that actually makes the states safer than it was at any time since 1969. That's a pretty safe place, actually. It's almost a statistical certainty that it will never happen to you in your lifetime. So, okay, I think that the reason for owning a gun to protect oneself against not the state but other citizens really is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more people out there with guns, the more likely guns are to be used in crimes. Nonetheless, the actual risk of being used, of using a gun or having a gun used against you is pretty small. But it's higher than anywhere else in the world. There's a real dichotomy in there, and I'm not sure, as some of the people in the comments have said, if you take all the guns out of the system, who the hell gets to choose whether or not you have a gun? Well, I think I've answered that. But more importantly, is it going to make a difference if you ban, let's say, handguns now? Well, probably not. But I think where you have high-powered rifles in particular, because of the particular threat that they pose, it is sensible to impose some restrictions on them, even if that actually winds up just being a permit system. I'd like you to keep it in a gun club. I can see the argument for keeping it in your home. I just don't feel, however, that the laws in the States make a great deal of sense when you really look down at it, if you are just talking about the Second Amendment stuff, as I said at the beginning. So, I know that was a little bit rambling. As I say, I'm in deep trouble at the moment. I've talked for too long already. I'm probably going to have to divide this video up. Thank you very much for the conversation, Fake Sagan. Please do feel free to have the last word on this, and if I don't respond, it's not because I want to disrespect you. I might have a chat with you about it on MSN or something, but probably because I suspect you've got other things you want to be doing. Lovely to talk to you. Stay safe.